Okay, greetings everybody. Dave DeWalt here, the founder of NightDragon, and can't tell you how excited I am to introduce our guests here for our NightVision program. As many of you know, we've been doing a NightVision series as part of NightDragon here. We're in season 2. We've done 12 episodes already, so kind of fun. And today we have some great guests, and I'm really excited about it. And I don't want to sound too positive and optimistic. I know we have a lot of global events going on in the world, and we'll talk about the seriousness of that in just a minute. But I really do want to talk to the backgrounds of the people that are part of our NightVision season 2, episode 2 here today. I'll start from left to right. I think everybody knows me, but founder of NightDragon, 20 years of cybersecurity experience. Feel like I grew up in the cyberspace, so to speak, but former CEO of McAfee, FireEye, Mandiant, and been working on investments and advisory in the business. I chair safety security for Delta Airlines, been 4 administrations with the White House. Just an honor to work with the government as well as the community here with my background. But I also have Eric McAlpine here as well, who is my partner over at Momentum Cyber. And he's the founder of Momentum Cyber, 20 plus years as well in the cyber investing experience, as well as Air Force experience prior to that. So thank you for your service, Eric, as well. And he knows more about every company in the cyber landscape. If you haven't seen our cyber landscape reports and cyber almanac reports, he tracks 6,875 cyber companies. And he has a lot of intimate knowledge about the industry and trends, and we'll be talking to Eric about that. But it's a great honor to have Robert Herjavec here. Robert, great to see you as well. Thank you for joining us. Probably needs no introduction, I'm sure, but a lot of people don't know how far back Robert Herjavec goes in the security industry, way back to when he founded Herjavec in 2003. He's been involved with the cyber community for a long time, not just an incredibly successful businessman, but an incredibly passionate cyber leader as well, doing cyber advisory for the country of Canada, events at the White House in the United States, and of course, building one of the most prolific cyber firms in the world. And we're going to talk a lot about Herjavec's merger with FishTech as well, and what's going on in there in a little bit. But Robert, thanks for joining us. And Gary Fish as well is here. Great to have Gary in the house. Gary and I go way back as well. Gary has had a long history with cyber as well. I think 10 startups and incredible success in building companies. He's one of the greatest company builders I know in cyber, doing it 10 times, just like Robert's done it a few times. It's amazing to kind of see all that, having initially built FishNet, which many of you know, up to a 700 million revenue company, then selling it and integrating it with Occuvant to form Optiv, which many of you know, and pretty cool background, and then founding FishTech, which is now merged with Herjavec. So looking forward to chatting with you guys about that as well. And last but not certainly least is my partner here as well and founder of AllegisCyber, Bob Ackerman is on. Bob has, again, incredible experience investing, managing, operating. He was called the cyber money man, lots of accolades, the founder of Data Tribe, one of the most prolific foundries in the world, having launched many important companies from scratch, building companies as part of Data Tribe, investing companies as part of AllegisCyber. I think he's forgotten more than most of us know about cyber, so it's great to have Bob. Look in aggregate here, I think we have 100+ years of combined cyber experience. I'm not sure we've ever assembled such a prolific group of people before, but I would tell you, everybody, it's an honor to host this and moderate this as a part of all the amazing things that are happening in cyber. So let's get down to it a little bit and get to a serious note. What an incredible scenario unfolding with Russia, Ukraine, with the activities in the world, and a bit sobering, obviously, but this is the first, at least in my time being in cyber, we've seen a real integrated, interlocked cyber component to warfare and to invasions of physical attacks at a magnitude, attacking supply chains, attacking government and websites, banking industry, APTs, everything pretty interesting. So maybe I'll throw it over to Bob first, if you will, just maybe with all your background working with governments and things, what's your take on all of this from a high level, and what do you think's behind it all? Bob, you might be on mute.
We're at that moment that I think we've all talked about and worried about for a fair number of years. I think we're potentially on the threshold of the first cyber hot war. I think that as global repercussions are applied against the Russians for their actions with respect to Ukraine, I think their response is likely to be significant escalation of cyber activities. I think that's sort of a weapon of choice in this environment because they don't want to expand the hot war. It doesn't mean you can't have a cyber hot war. And I think we're likely to see that. As usual, I would expect that a lot of the pre-preparation and the reconnaissance they've done will be utilized. And I expect them to go after critical infrastructure and financial institutions where they can have probably the broadest reaching impact. This is not a surprise, but I think we're likely to be tested in ways that we've speculated about for a number of years. But this is, cyber doesn't know any domain per se. And I think cyber is going to be the response of choice on the part of the Russians to the sanctions that are going to be escalating in response to their physical activities on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah, maybe Robert, over to you. I'd love to hear your views too. I know Croatian-born, Canadian, American combination of all the things, and some of this probably is real for you in a lot of different ways. What's your vantage point on all of this? And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think Bob makes some great points, Dave, and I think it's, as you said, incredibly sobering. For me, it really hits home when I never thought in my lifetime I would see a physical war. And I think most people prior to the civil war in Yugoslavia, which was the last major war fought in Europe, where, countrymen were killing each other over grievances from 300 years ago. And here we are in the Ukraine again. And so I think it worries me. I think there's incredible escalation potential here. It's obvious that Putin has much greater desires beyond Russia and his perception of Russia. On a personal level, we worry about what could happen in Croatia because the Serbian government is heavily backed by the Russian government and has a lot of expansion ambitions. But I think to Bob's point, Dave, it just goes to show how intertwined cyber is with physical. There is no physical without cyber today. Modern warfare cannot be fought on the supply chain, on the banking front, without a strong cyber component. And really, is it any different than an e-commerce strategy without some element of a physical strategy in our world? And so I think you're going to see a lot of that come together. And it's like we always say to our customers, God only helps those who help themselves. You need to protect yourself. The government is not going to save you. If you're a large enterprise or you're an e-commerce business today, you can complain all you want. And you can think that the world is going to help you if there's a breach or something bad happens. You've got to help yourself. And so not to be morbid, but obviously pretty bullish, I think, for our industry, and just goes to show the need for what we all do and how that's going to grow in the future.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Robert. And maybe to you, Gary, for a second. I've always called cyber domain, I called it the fifth battleground or the fifth domain. And I know, Bob Ackerman, you've called it that too. We've watched mankind conflict over its history on discoveries of lands or oceans or air or space or now cyberspace. But to watch the fifth domain or the fifth battleground sort of subsume in many ways and interlock in many ways with all the other conflicts. I used to talk about obfuscation and anonymity in the internet, enabling a lot of attackers. And here, we can see the enemy, we can see the adversary, we can see the activities, and Russia's been very active for a long period of time, but incredibly active over the last 12 months. We watched SolarWinds occur. We watched the shell organizations attack the Colonial Pipeline with ransomware activities. We've been watching almost daily attacks in the supply chain now from the SVR and other types of agencies within the Russian domain. It's an incredible buildup of might and attacking that can occur in the future. Gary, give us your perspective. I mean, gosh, you've been on the front lines of this as well. High level comments, things going on in your mind with what you're watching.
No, I mean, just a high level comment is, we've all been pushing cyber for many years, and what this does for us and for the industry, I think, is show that cyber's here and cyber's here to stay. And it's a very important part of our defense, both for corporations and for governments.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Gary. It's important. Public-private partnerships, the ability to come together as a village. I've been very encouraged, one man on all of the US government and its allies, Five Eye partners coming together to create public-private partnerships. But boy, do the governments need the private industry to help. And I thought, Robert, you hit on that too. And Gary, you as well. It takes a village to solve these problems, and working together is a key component of that for sure. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason, Dave, when you talk about why once upon a time communities would band together and build fortified villages. It was the communal defense, and from a digital perspective, we're right back to where we were hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, you bet, Bob. Well, I want to bring Eric into this as well because being our partner here in all of this, it's interesting to hear from the defensive side as well. And what a year it was. And maybe Sarah, you put up the slide here, or maybe Eric, you could talk a little bit about what's happened in the past 12 months, in the world of cyber. To call it the golden age of cyber would be an understatement from an investment, from an M&A point of view, from a sort of a reality point of view, as the world's attention on this space has grown dramatically. Maybe just talk about a couple of the stats, because some of these are eye-popping, Eric, in a way that, many people aren't as aware of.
Yeah, Dave, 2021, what a remarkable year. By any measure, whether it's capital markets activity, private, public, or M&A and strategic activity in cybersecurity. I can just take us a little bit around the horn here. We've been putting this visual up since I presented this 5 years ago at CyberTech, when you, me, Michael, Dino, and Keith launched this firm. And the numbers were very different, very different. If you look at just the number of sort of billion-dollar M&A deals, right? Last year, we did 14 of them, right? You didn't even make the top 10, the leaderboard, unless you had a transaction value greater than $1 billion. And many of these much greater than $1 billion. But if you look at the year before that, it was about 6. And any one year in the years, 4 or 5 years leading up to that, it was sort of 3, 4 or 5. So, there's definitely an appetite here. This is being driven largely by private equity, who is now a real strategic partner to our ecosystem. And whereas before we would sort of bifurcate exit paths as being strategic or financial, they really have come together, and the private equity firms and our colleagues over there, our brethren over there, have really done a service to the industry by coming in such a meaningful way to support the journeys of these companies that are keeping us safe. I'd like to say that. In terms of, if you look at private equity, 130 deals last year, how does that compare to the year before that? The year before that, it was 66, which was a record-smashing year in and of itself. And so it's just not going to stop. 30 unicorns, probably more than 30. I mean, this is data that is not perfect, but the data, our proprietary database has over 30 new companies being minted as billion-dollar market cap companies. The year before that, it was 6. And so, I think that these mega rounds are here to stay. If you look at the number of funds that have raised flagship funds over the last 24 and 36 months, with a huge appetite to deploy those funds, it's enormous. There is so much capital on the sidelines right now. And regardless of where valuations are, they're putting it to work. And then if you look at the lower right there, number of capital raises over $100 million. When I was first in this business, Dave, an IPO was $100 million. You'd raise 40 or $50 million before going public, and then you'd have a $100 million IPO, and you were like, king of the hill. Now that's table stakes, right? We're seeing some of these companies come out of the gate raising 9-figure deals, really pricing these companies. And so, it just all speaks to, and these are financial metrics, so we kind of coined that phrase, the golden age of cyber. But I just really think that this is an industry that is finally really starting to grow up. And when we first started in this industry, I always called it a toddler, right? When you compared it to other verticals within tech, I think we're a teenager now. Maybe we're about to go to college, but it's really grown up fast, and it's through funds like yours and Bob's, and some of these more cyber focused funds that really understand that it's a village, it's an ecosystem, it's government working with commercial, it's countries working together that have really grown this industry up fast.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Eric. And, it's amazing to see the stats here. Just as folks are watching, I've been talking about our first $100 billion market cap company. 3 years ago, I was predicting, that we would see our first $100 billion valued cybersecurity company. This past year, we saw our first few pass the $70 billion mark, 7 of them pass a $50 billion. Makes me want to go back and be a CEO of a company again, but I'm not doing that. But it's amazing to watch. And even today, while a lot of the markets are down sharply, the cybersecurity companies are up. Maybe Bob Ackerman, just say a few words. I mean, you watch this market grow. I mean, what inning are we in? What confluences do you see coming together that, maybe shows that this market is a market that is going to grow a whole lot more?
Well, I think, Dave, we've talked about cyber as sort of the existential, threat to the global digital economy, and I think we're living through the realization of that right now. Not that there haven't been strong indicators in the past, and I think what we're likely to see is sort of a step function of sophistication in terms of how we think about the threats and how we think about responding to those threats. Well, we've dealt with sort of the insidious ransomware attacks and the entire spectrum of cyber activity by a broad spectrum of players. It's been largely, I would say, as annoying as it's been and as costly as it's been. We haven't seen the cyber threat landscape fully come into its own, and heaven forbid we may be on the cusp of that. We don't know exactly where it's going to manifest itself first. We don't know if it can be firewalled, but as the world begins to engage in this conflict, cyber being the landscape through which a lot of that will be expressed, I think it will demonstrate that what we've been talking about for a number of years was not a hypothetical, and that in fact the consequences could in fact be not only debilitating but devastating. Again, this is untrod territory. But I think what it does is we're going to find out, frankly, how good we are on the defensive side. We're likely to find out how good we are on the offensive side as both of them play out in the market. But I think it's going to be a clear demonstration to the broader market that cyber is, in fact, that existential threat, and that every organization that's engaged in that digital economy has a level of exposure and needs to take that exposure very, very seriously. And not only deploy capital, but deploy sophistication and become more sophisticated in terms of how it thinks about its defensive strategies and how it prepares to operate in an environment where, once this happens the first time, it's likely to happen more frequently on an accelerated basis and more seriously. And so when I think about a step function, I think we're potentially, on the cusp of that step function and things becoming a little more dangerous, a little more common. And that's going to push all of us on the defensive side to just get better and better and better at what we do.
Yeah.
Bob, it's so interesting what you say. That is, I don't think anybody should expect, listening to this, that this is going to be clean. I don't think anybody should expect that Russia, I think all we know at this point is that America is very comfortable with sanctions, but not comfortable in escalating that. But I don't think anybody here should mistake that Russia is comfortable with sanctions, and that there won't be retaliation in the digital front for that. Interesting side note, I read this interesting article where Russian oligarchs are moving their yachts out of countries where they can be seized. So, we may be able to get their physical assets, but I think we're going to see a massive push outwards from Russia against countries that provide sanctions. But, Dave, to your question, the litmus test for me about our industry is at the consumer level. I do a TV show. It's a popular show in the States and been doing it for 15 years. And when I first got on TV, I would go to these big Hollywood parties with lots of people, and people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm in the cybersecurity business. It's really interesting." And people would be like, yeah, whatever. Tell me about Shark Tank. How does it work? It's so interesting. Now, all joking aside, I go to these big Hollywood parties. People are like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm Shark Tank." I'm like, yeah. Tell me about cybersecurity. Tell me, are my pictures on my phone safe? How should I be doing banking? Like, I think our industry has crossed that chasm and that line where it's no longer a tech industry. It's something that is just matter of fact, that everybody is part of. And I love what Eric said. I think we're definitely a toddler, and we're just trying to pick our college right now. We're trying to see which has the best parties, what we should be studying, and where we should go. But it's exciting from that perspective.
Robert, I'm laughing a little because as I was preparing for this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go watch some Shark Tanks to see how Robert moderates Shark Tank so I can be better at this today. I was like, I'm never nervous for anything, as you know. Do you remember you and I did some TV like way back, and I don't even know what year it was, and I was up in Canada with you, but you're an amazing luminary and, sort of advocate for cyber. So it's really interesting to see that 360 coming around.
Well, Dave, it's funny. In the first couple of seasons, when we were shooting the show, they said, "How do you want us to introduce you?" And I said, "Oh, I want to be known as the cybersecurity guy." And the producers all kind of sat around and they were like, "Yeah, about that. It's really not that interesting. Can we come up with something different?" So look how far we've come in that 15 years. Like, I get my haircut now, and the guy cutting my hair wants to tell me about all the great industries in cyber and how much money he's got invested in that. So there's a lot of cash on the sidelines. I think the problem is we're going to see a huge amount of integration, and the M&A pace, to Eric's point, I think is just going to continue, Dave, because I think, we're all kind of rushing for the same customer. And I think what we're going to start seeing is this need for liquidity in all of these companies. I think our merger was a great merger of two great operating companies. But I think there's a lot of companies out there that are accessing that free capital in effect that may not have the operational expertise. And so I think you're going to see more pressure of these companies to continue to operate and come together.
Yeah. Robert, thank you for those comments. I'm just envisioning requesting to bring a couple really cool cyber crypto companies or something on the Shark Tank. We'll bring them on, and you can really grill us for cyber stuff. Hey, I want to bring Gary into this kind of high level trend conversation too, before we talk a little bit about the two companies coming together. But, Gary, again, what a year 2021 was, threats, trends, things, you've been involved with this as long as anybody. What's your macro comments on where we're at and what's happening? Love to hear that.
Yeah, I think there's been a big fundamental change on mindsets, and the new mindset is not if, but when. When am I going to be breached, and what am I going to do when I get breached, and who's going to be my partner, and what tools am I going to have?
Yeah, no doubt that that's occurring for sure and happening here. I have a slide I want to show the audience here and maybe have Eric opine about it as a segue to talk about some of the bigger trends, particularly that Robert and Gary and Bob see every day. It's a little bit of an eye pleaser, I guess, or shocker. So Sarah, advance it. Eric, talk a little bit about the growth of number of cyber companies, the categories, the Cyberscape report you do, and what font size are you using now to put this up?
Yeah, Eric, can you blow that up? I can't see it.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, is this the list of all the companies you've been CEO of?
Oh, touche. Touche. Yeah, there's a couple in the corner over here that I think I got. Yeah, it's the ones I want to become CEO of, for sure. Funny.
Yeah.
Eric, yeah, talk about this for a minute.
Yeah, Dave, this eye chart, it's a labor of love. And believe it or not, we actually have technology. There's technology, not just people, but technology that positions where these logos are and tracks these now, because it's just almost impossible to do it with a human touch. There's just way too many tiles within the mosaic. You had to sort of digitize it, if you will. Earlier, you kind of positioned me as somewhat of the Ben Stein of cyber, like I track 6,800 companies, and this is a team effort. Both Keith and Dino and our extended team, really get a lot of the credit for this market map and helping me maintain it and cover it as a strategic advisor to the ecosystem. When you think about the theme that that always resonates with me when I see this is platforms matter. If I were a chief security officer and I looked at this and said, I have to understand this, or my staff has to understand this chart, that's exhausting. There's not enough hours in the day to hear the pitches from all of these vendors, right? And so the consolidation that we're seeing in the marketplace, that's accelerating just because we need solution providers. And that's what, the vision of Robert and Gary really was, outcomes matter here. And, you can work with multiple vendors here, but it's really about the outcome. And so as we track this, we start to look at this from more of a practitioner point of view, and we start to see things like the cyber defense matrix and other areas and paradigms to look at this. I think this is a very important boardroom slide, just if you are in the M&A or capital markets business. But from a practitioner standpoint, as we're seeing these platforms come together, I think we're going to have to think about this chart and how it evolves over time.
Yeah, and Eric, I agree. It's incredible to watch. I mean, I remember being CEO of McAfee way back in the day when Robert was also just building up Herjavec Group in Canada, and like you could count the number of vendors on one hand or a couple hands. There wasn't many of us, and here we are growing. Bob Ackerman, I want to ask you a question, and maybe for the whole group here. When you look at all these categories in the cyberscape, what couple of categories do you see as the hottest areas for investment? Maybe the most important areas of investment, particularly in light of the dislocation of offense and defense. Opine a little bit on some of the categories and things you're seeing, Bob, from just hottest of hot. And I'd love Robert and Gary to comment too.
Dave, I think a couple of observations. You and I talk a lot about, if you want to build cutting edge defense, take your cues from offense, because virtually everything that's developed in those offensive playbooks eventually end up in the threat landscape that affect the rest of us. So I think some of the areas that I think are particularly compelling, obfuscation. I think making it harder for an adversary to identify and latch on to a target, is an area where we're probably going to see a fair amount of innovation, because it has just such a disproportionate impact. If you can reduce, your threat surface, by definition, you become hypothetically more secure. I think we're going to transition from a kind of a reactive posture, where I think we've largely been over the last 15 to 20 years, to one where we're going to have to become a little more deterministic about how we evaluate our threat posture, our coverage. Where are we vulnerable? Where do we need more secure? Where are we overcovered? Where are we undercovered? The concept of continuous controls monitoring that I think was probably first articulated by Phil Venables when he was over at Goldman Sachs is an area where I think as cyber grows up, back to Eric's, point, moving from a toddler to a teenager, and we become more sophisticated in terms of how we approach cyber. I think that the preventive, deterministic, proactive management is going to become, really, really important. I think continuous controls monitoring fits right into that. I also think we have to think about new threat vectors. I think at some point in time here, we are going to see, sort of the weaponization of data. At some point in time, we become reasonably secure with respect to our infrastructure. Never totally secure, but we become more secure. And the adversary doesn't say, okay, well, that was a good run, let's go home. The adversary adapts. And if you look at a lot of what we've seen in cyber, really it reflects the digitization. Sometimes I say it's the digitization of all bad human behavior, but it certainly includes the digitization of warfare tactics. And disinformation, weaponization of information, I think is going to become one of those new threat vectors. And it's going to be particularly insidious because weaponized data is going to fly right through all of our defensive infrastructure and have a really disproportionate impact on the things that information in a digitized economy are dependent on that information. So those are three of the things that I think about, Dave.
Yeah, over to you, Robert, for a second. Big categories like SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, Zero Trust. How do you distill down now that you see everything from a big managed security services? What do you think are some of the big areas of cyber going forward?
Well, I think, Dave, everybody on this call kind of knows what the big areas are: cloud and endpoint and IoT. But I kind of look at this slide a little differently, if I can, from an operational perspective. And what it tells me is more security vendors do not equate to more security. And so I look at slides like this as one of the catalysts, actually, and the drivers of our industry. So imagine we're all technical people, Dave, and we all understand these vendors. Imagine being the CEO of an enterprise today and seeing this slide. Like, your reaction is what? Like, am I supposed to buy all of these things? Like when you and I started out, Dave, I think the average enterprise, I was reading a report, had 12 security products. And back then we thought that was a lot. Today, the average enterprise is something like 78, or I forget what the number is. And then I look at this slide and I say, how does a CEO get more security? And so to me, and a little bit self-serving, admittedly, I think the managed security space is one of the hottest space, if you will, from an investment perspective, because the people buying our stuff, not the people making technical decisions, but the people actually buying our stuff, that's the greatest value for them. How do I make the tools work? Do our customers actually need more weapons, or do they need to weaponize the weapons in a cohesive strategy that they already have?
I can't agree more, Robert. I believe one of the biggest trends we're seeing is the dawn of, security as a service, a managed security service, which becomes a utility that, like water, like, electricity, we need security as a service as an integrated part. And that's a great segue maybe for us to talk about really what's been happening between Herjavec and with FishTech and the merger. I'd love to do that. I know we have about 70 questions that have been coming online here, and I want to save time for that. But Sarah, advance the slide for us because I want to tee this up a little bit. I think it's important, as I think about the world of M&A, and Eric, you can opine too, is it's an interesting world where scale matters. The trends of having a trusted advisor, as Robert was just illustrating, matters when you're looking at that daunting 6,000, vendors in there, and how do I distill it down to what really matters? Here we had just an incredible incredible set of transactions. First, Apex as a large strategic financial partner, essentially acquiring and merging with Herjavec Group, and then ultimately Herjavec coming together with FishTech to create, in my opinion, one of the most important companies out there, a largest managed security service provider, MDR provider, 600 plus customers, 600 plus million of revenue, large entity coming together, US, Canada, global footprint, large importance to the world, with all the security operations centers that you've now built and the recognition around being one of the kind of deal of the year candidates. So, I'd love for you to both talk about, the whys behind all that, and any fun stories. Maybe Robert or Gary, whoever wants to chat about this. What an incredible combination, especially with the icons like yourselves leading it as well. Tell us about how it all came about, Robert. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I can let Robert jump in, but we didn't set out to do this merger. I was actually out raising capital. Was out looking to raise a couple $100 million and using Momentum Cyber as a banker. And we known about the Apex Herjavec deal, obviously, but we weren't going that direction. I was going my direction. Robert was going his direction. And towards the end of our deal, with a couple weeks left, we were taking bids, and Apex called up, and actually, I believe Robert contacted me. He said, "What do you think if we merged our companies?" And Apex, led the merger, and we said, "Well, that's an interesting idea." And we quickly got on the phone. It quickly escalated to a deal conversation. We shut down our process, which every PE likes, right? So we shut down in the middle of the process. We thought this was so compelling. Robert and I talked. I said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I'd like to run it." I said, "Great, because I like to build them and then let somebody else run them." So it was just a perfect fit of where I was at in my career and where Robert's at in his career. And from the moment we got together in a conference room and started talking about how we fit this together, we could see the synergies.
Yeah, I think
Robert, over to you.
Really well said. Yeah, really well said, Gary. And so first of all, Dave, thanks for calling us icons, which is just nice speak for really old people in cybersecurity.
I was gonna call you all the grandfathers or godfathers, and then I started the bad reference.
Well, icon's better. Full credit to Gary. I have a huge amount of respect for Gary. I've known him for probably as long as I've known you, Dave, and always admired the companies he's built and his vision for it. And I got to tell you, like he said, from the very first call, we had this bigger vision. And I think we are so bullish about what we do, and forgetting the money, forgetting the M&A, I think we both believe in it. I really fundamentally believe we're doing good for the world. And how great is it to be in an industry that you love, that you also feel does good? But our vision was of something so much bigger. And to Gary's credit, he could have done the deal. We could have stayed on our course, but we saw this vision of managed security, MDR, really becoming something critical and important in the industry. And really, if you're going to play this game, why not play it to win? And if you're going to do something, why not do it to be the best in the world? And I think Gary's vision and my vision was, we've all done some interesting stuff and some good stuff, but we want to be the best in the world. And I think when we all look back on our career, all we can ask for is the opportunity to play this game at the highest possible level. And I think that's what this merger has done. I think it's brought two incredible companies together, couple solid grandfather leaders, and created something really, really special in the market. Couldn't be more excited, Dave.
Robert and Gary, I want to hear your take on this. As an operator myself for many years, I can't remember how many M&A deals I've done. I think it's 43 now, or some number up in there. And one thing I learned was, it's all about the people, right? At the end of the day, you got these great products, you got this great technology, but creating emotional attachment for people. What are you two doing as leaders to kind of, help with that people side of things? And do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can go. Obviously, the people are the most important part, and we've always built great cultures in our business, and through various ways, and through our own actions, and not purposely trying to build that, but the way we conduct ourselves, we tend to build great cultures. And but people are the most important part, and the last few years have been really tough on people, and so as leaders too, we've really had to figure out how to navigate COVID and lockdowns, and when do we go back to the office, and does that alienate people? I built these great offices in Kansas City, spent a lot of money on them. They're beautiful. And I was one of the first to, I think, probably in our industry, to get people back to the office. Because I'm like, hey, we got these great facilities. Let's get back to the office. And we had a mix of those that wanted to be there and some that were nervous about being there. But, really, it's been a special challenge over the last 2 years, something that none of us have, as business people, have ever had to deal with. And so, going that extra mile, doing virtual happy hours, doing virtual events, upping our communication game. In business, the biggest problem we always have is people want more communication, more communication, more communication. Doesn't matter how much you do. And one thing that the yin and yang of Robert and I, Robert loves to get up and talk, and does great at it, loves to get on a stage, loves to get on a webinar. I personally hate it. It's been so great having Robert, because he loves doing that. He communicates really well. So he and I have, become partners in this, and I've always gone it alone and never had a partner like Robert, where you can say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I believe he has the same thing. It's lonely at the top sometimes, and it really helps to have another person that's been there, done that in the mix, so you can bounce things off of each other.
Yeah, it's funny, Dave, and you know this, when you're running a company and you've got lots of people that you're responsible for and you want to do great things, who do you call just to complain? Like, everybody walks into my office and, I'm like Gary. I'm a very approachable guy with our people. And I always say, it's an open door policy. Come into my office, talk about anything. The downside of that is people actually do come into my office and talk about anything. And then some days I'm like, who do I get to call and complain about everything? And I love having Gary as a partner in that, because he's been there. You don't know what it's like to run a business until you've actually run the business. You don't know the scar, you don't know the pain. And it's really great just to kind of have that sounding board at time. I will tell you, we at Herjavec Group did 12 deals as we're growing the companies. We probably did the first 4 completely wrong and learned from that. But the hardest thing to replicate is the passion for the business and for the industry. You can put it all in a spreadsheet, you can hire all the best people, you can put all the MBAs, but it's very difficult to bring that together. And I think Gary built an incredibly passionate company about growth, about winning, about cyber, and so did we. And so now we're just trying to make sure that everybody feels they have a voice in that, because everything you said, Dave, it's so true. Very first company, when I started it, I wanted to get funding from my bank. And they said to me, what assets do you have? What hard assets do you have to use as collateral for the loan you need, Mr. Herjavec? And I was like, well, all my assets go home every night. And I didn't get a loan. So you're right. All our greatest assets are people, and it's our customers. And it's very fluid, and we're custodians of that. We need to take good care of them so they can take good care of our customers.
It's so great to see Robert, you and Gary come together. You know, we've been friends for a long time, and watching you two yin and yang here, you know, really touches my heart. So I wish you all the best. I got one last question for you because I got to ask about the merger. So before we get all these questions online, is there a new name yet? When's that being launched? And by the way, I could come up with a lot of shark, fish things that come up with to help you if you want.
Oh, Gary, what was the first name we were jokingly came up? We were going to call it
Herjavec. We had fish shark, shark fish. There's all kinds of stuff, but I'll let Robert answer the question. But there is a name.
Okay.
There is a name, and I think we've done a great job of coming together. I think the best way to think of Gary and I, Dave, is it's kind of like we're twins. It's like that movie with Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm obviously the Arnold Schwarzenegger character, and Gary's the Danny DeVito character. I think that's. But we do name. We did a whole name search, and the name we're going to market with was actually the product name that Gary's team came up with for their managed service, which is Cyderis, which means cyber defense and response. And could it be any more topical than right now today? So we're elevating that brand name as the overall company name and go to market with that. So everybody on this call, you're the first to hear that. Breaking news flash.
I didn't know you were going to release that, Robert.
I was wondering if I could get it out of Robert. Yeah.
Well, it's not like it's not like we're recording this, Gary. So
right.
Thank you for sharing that, Robert. I was wondering if you would give that away. It's such a fun. I should have had like a gender reveal like thing, you know, where we could have like had a drum roll and like you could have said it. I could have helped you with marketing on that.
We can do that for the colors. We'll do that for the colors.
Yes.
For the colors, perfect. Hey, let's transition a little bit to all the questions coming online, and maybe over to Bob here on this first one. Theo Nasser asked a great question. Who built a company, founder, CEO in the world of training and education for cyber. But question was really, do you see a realistic future for the establishment of cyber rules of engagement around the world, like a peace treaty, like rules of conduct? I mean, Bob, what do you think of all that?
Yeah, look, you know, it's obviously topical. There's been a lot of discussion, you know, about those rules of engagement. There's been discussion about limiting offensive uses of technology, going after critical infrastructure, things that affect, you know, basically population citizenry. But frankly, until we see the dark side of this manifest itself a little more fully, I don't think the political will is going to be there. At some point in time, when people realize the full consequences of what can be done digitally, and people, you know, come to that conclusion that it's unaffordable and unacceptable, I think you're gonna need a catalyst like that. And you hate to think that it has to get to that point before people step back and say, look, we got to put some rules for engagement in place here. But, you know, today it's the Wild West, and it's the Wild West with very, very little consequence. And until there are consequence, and until the full impact of those cyber operations are felt, I think the adversaries, you know, the ones that would negotiate or be party to such an agreement, which really are the nation states, see more upside from the current rules than they do downside. And so until that changes, I think it's going to be very hard to get people together and agree to a set of rules.
One of the areas that I've been passionate about, and I'd love to hear Robert, Gary, Eric comment too, is the area of education and the lack of talent that exists to meet the demand in the world of cyber today. I forget the exact number, but we're measured in the millions of job openings that are out there, you know, where we just can't fill them with talent and people, and our systems of education and, you know, aren't really well devised to create a steady stream of talent. We invest in NightDragon, a company called Thrive DX, which helps bring cyber and education and technology together. But, you know, there isn't many of them out there. And I think it's one of the most important things is solving that cyber gap of talent that's out there. maybe Eric, to you real quick, what are you seeing trending wise there, investments, what's happening in your world? I know it too, but curious on your thought.
Well, first of all, Dave, I believe this is the number one existential threat to our industry, right? I mean, cyber warfare aside, when you think about the health of our ecosystem, we need to get more young people into this ecosystem and educated. And the problem for the traditional university system is that, offensive and defensive cyber, it's a trade craft. It's learned on the job. And you have to then understand that and provide tools and curriculum in an education system that embraces that and provides young people with an opportunity to learn that trade, over a period of time. And as we can just onboard more young people into this industry, this will solve itself over time, but it's not going to be anytime soon. And we need companies like ThriveDX or what Hack the Box does, or HackerOne and BugCrowd and Synac, being able to sort of crowdsource this problem and all come together on it.
Yeah, I'd like to add, we have a great training ground in our SOCs, and so if we can get people with good fundamentals out of universities, whether computer science or IT background. I say that, and then I think about some of our best people didn't even go to college, right? So in high school, they're just computer whizzes. They were great at coding, and we bring them into the SOC, and they get all this training, and they don't have to be on site at a customer under the gun. They can be in the SOC. They can be around peers, and that can help them out. And then we grow them up, and some leave us. They get a lot of training. They get a lot of introduction to the cybersecurity space, and some leave, and then some get moved up. And we see that as a win-win for all of us if we can bring them in, get them trained, move them up, or if they move out and get another job. It's very fulfilling when you look back as you've built companies and you see all these people that used to work for you at all these different places and doing well. And, we've created CEOs, we've created VPs, they're out there, they're thriving. And, all we want to do is see people do well. And they can either do well for us or well for someone else. But I believe, our great training ground is through the SOC.
Dave,
yeah, what's your okay?
I'd like just to riff off what Gary said there, and I think it's a really important point. And that, if you look at where we have the most critical shortage of talent today, you start looking at threat analysts and those lower level positions, and we've got to move past the fact that requires a 4-year college degree. It doesn't. I've always thought that the junior college system was a grossly underutilized resource to provide sort of the fundamental basics to train up threat analysts. There's an interesting company out there, SiteGain, actually a group of ex-NSA guys that basically take live threats and put them in a training environment where they can train people against active threats and really give them that live fire exercise. And if you start thinking about, let's grab kids out of a junior college, or maybe to Gary's point, no college background at all, and put them in an environment where they can train against active threats in a live fire environment, we can really accelerate the development and closing the gap on the trained analyst community. And we've got to get out of this. It requires a 4-year computer science degree. It requires a master's degree. It does not. There are certain positions where that background is really important, very, very useful. But when you talk about the 3.5 to 4 million unfilled jobs out there today, many of those can be tackled by just grabbing capable, interested, committed talent, putting it through a rudimentary course and giving it some early experience. That doesn't require, that's not a moonshot. All the resources are in place basically to do that. It simply takes will and coordination.
Bob, that's such a great point. And I think what Gary said too, like I think one of the greatest things about our industry is the aspirational aspect of it. One of the things I've always loved about cyber is you can rise as high as you want in this industry based on the value that you provide. Gary started his company with nothing and built it into this massive success. And I started with nothing. And when I started out, people said to me, to be successful in business, it's not what you know, it's who you know. In order to make money, you have to have money. Well, you know, my father swept floors in a factory and my mom was a receptionist. So I was kind of screwed at the beginning if I believed that, and I didn't. And I was very lucky to get into cyber when I was 21 years old. And I learned very quickly that this industry, to be good, you have to add value. And value doesn't come with a college degree necessarily. It doesn't necessarily come with an MBA. I have a degree in classical English literature. There were about as many jobs for that as there were for cyber back then. But I think, Bob, you make an excellent point. We've got to get our head around that. We can train a lot of the people, and this is a great industry. I mean, this is a great industry to be in, and it's fun and it's exciting, and we do good work. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Listen, we only have a couple minutes left. I want to do a quick rapid fire, and I want to hear each of you give me one bold prediction for 2022 in the world of cyber. It could be a trend, it could be a threat, it could be in anything. You know, I got 100+ years of experience sitting here. I've got to ask you, you know, what do you see? What bold thing might you see this year that, you know, is either worrying you or you're excited about? You know, love to hear that. Who wants to go first? Don't be shy. Come on, one bold prediction.
I'll jump in, Dave. I think this actually, we may have seen a bit of a peak. All markets are cyclical, right? M&A markets, capital markets have seen this, and we've been on such an upswing when it comes to this era that we're in terms of capital formation and M&A. And we may be at that point where 2022 isn't necessarily a year where we're going to get to brag on this webinar next year that we doubled the previous year. It may be a year about preparedness and just readiness and sort of back to fundamentals. Right now, I can tell you, as we track what is driving valuations, it's three things, or it has been three things up until now: growth, growth, and growth. And if you look at the correlation of, you know, revenue multiples to growth, right now that's correlated at about 68%. That R squared is something you can believe. It's undeniable at correlation. And when you look at kind of the rule of 40 or 50 or 60 that a lot of our private equity brethren have kind of subscribed to for many years, that correlation is below 10% now. When I see those two that far out of whack, I think the pendulum is going to start to shift a little bit. And I don't want to, I'm not calling doomsday here because it's my job. We make a living off of being a service provider and providing advice to the capital markets and to boards and CEOs. But I just think that there potentially could be a little bit of a rationalization this year.
Yeah, you know, let me pick up on Eric's comment, because I think you touched on a really interesting point. You know, Eric, you know, we've talked about this, right? I get asked all the time: is cyber underinvested or overinvested? My answer is yes.
Yes.
You know, the venture community is doing what the venture community always does, which is not specific to cyber, which is no great opportunity will go undercapitalized. Yeah. And when we look at the 6,800 companies that you guys are tracking, I divide it in two worlds. You know, overcapitalized, undifferentiated, me too, cyber solutions that are drafting off momentum, and folks that are doing cutting edge, truly disruptive problem solving. Mm-hmm. And I think the Me Too undifferentiated is grossly overcapitalized. That market needs to be rationalized. We need to see consolidation in that space. And we need to see more investment in sort of the next wave of truly disruptive innovation in cybersecurity. You know, secure by design, where we get out of, you know, whack-a-mole, reactive, you know, to the inherent risk and vulnerabilities in the infrastructure as we go from an analog to a digital transformation. We need to fundamentally rethink. So I think we're going to go through a period of consolidation. I think it's a healthy thing. I think it lays the foundation for the next generation of truly innovative solutions that we are going to clearly understand we need coming out of this current global engagement. You know, I get a data point. Before our call today, I reached out to Kareem Hijazi over Prevailing and said, tell me what you see. And for those that don't know Prevalion, they basically signals intelligence guys out of the NSA that run a global sensor network, picking up on threat intelligence. They said over the last 180 days, they've seen 300 APTs from nation states that have deployed malware that is beaconed out from 700,000 IP addresses over 125 billion times. And those 700K IP addresses distill down to 30,000 organizations in over 200 industry groups. That's the global economy. That's serious. And so, you know, this coming of age story, Eric, that you talked about with respect to cyber, you know, we need to get past that initial blush of enthusiasm, which has benefited all of us, and get to a place where it's like, let's rationalize innovation as it exists today and focus on the next generation of how do we begin to get ahead of this as opposed to chasing it.
Should have made this a happy hour so we could have a cocktail after that comment. Robert,
I have
any last comments from you two before I wrap it up?
Yeah, I have a big one on that. I think this is the year the VAR finally dies. I think if you're a VAR, you're in trouble. So, and I think if you're a manufacturer looking for VARs to sell your product, you better find a new sales channel for that. You know, for those on the call that don't know, VAR is value-added reseller. And I made a great amount of money off of doing that. I built a big company off of that. But the new normal is services, and delivering this as a service. There's no more value in selling products any longer, in my opinion, other than discounts. And so if you're not big, where you can discount and meet discounts and move a large volume of product, then you better start rethinking your business. So I predict this year VAR will die.
So, Robert, we'll end with you.
Less shiny object, more security. To Gary's point, there's a lot of shiny objects in our industry. We have become the shiny object. What's that cartoon where the dog is walking through the woods and a squirrel goes by and the dog's like, squirrel, squirrel. Every time I turn around, there's a new squirrel, new shiny object in our world. I predict less of that and more services. CEOs want to buy less stuff and more security.
More results, absolutely.
Yeah, outcome based.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to say thank you to all the audience for coming on. I see a lot of questions in chat, and my phone's blown up with emails and texts during this session too. But thank you, Eric McAlpine. Thank you for putting together the Cyber Almanac and all the information we saw. Bob Ackerman, thank you for the partnership, relationship, investment, and all the experience. Robert Herjavec, so good to see you, my friend, and good luck with the merger here with Gary. Gary, thank you so much. I can't tell you how honored I am to have you all. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being a part of our NightVision show. Have a wonderful day, and take care. Be safe.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye, everybody.